Hi there, it's me, Finn. And tonight, we're going to talk about something you probably haven't thought about much. But once you do, it's kind of hard to stop wondering. How did people in medieval times go to the bathroom? Yep, I said that. We all know about the castles, the moats, the feasts, and the swords. But what about the quiet, hidden parts of everyday life? Like, when someone had to use the toilet. Or didn't even have one. Did they have toilet paper? Where did they go if they were in a town, or far out in the countryside? And what if they were living in a castle? And wait, how did they manage during the long cold nights, or when their stomach wasn't feeling quite right? So, let's talk about that, and more. Let's start by subscribing. Now, let's begin. It was a calm morning, somewhere around the year 13, in a small English village, nestled between quiet hills and soft gray skies. The kind of morning where fog hangs just above the ground, and the air feels wet, like the grass hasn't dried since last week. You wake up inside a one-room timber house. You're lying on a bed made of straw, and your blanket is probably a coarse wool one. There's no pillow, maybe just a wrapped cloth, and your breath makes little clouds in the air, because it's cold. It's always cold this time of year. You stretch your arms, and yeah, your stomach turns. That stew from last night wasn't exactly fresh. Now the question is, where do you go? There is no bathroom, no toilet, not even a hole in the floor. You don't even have shoes on right now, but you need to go, soon. In many small homes, they kept something called a chamber pot. It's exactly what it sounds like. A little pot, often made of clay or metal, that people would keep under the bed, or maybe under a wooden stool. It was used when they didn't feel like going outside. So, if you were lucky, you reached under the bed, carefully, trying not to knock it over, and pulled it out. Some pots were shaped like a little cauldron, with handles. Others were just bowls. But none of them smelled nice. And here's the thing, most people didn't clean them often. Sometimes just once a day. Sometimes even less. And what did they do with what was inside? Well, that's when things get a little more complicated. If you lived in a town, there were usually gong farmers, or night soil men, people whose entire job was to collect human waste, usually from cesspits and outside toilets. They worked only at night, because of the smell, and the danger. And yes, people paid them for this. The chamber pots were often dumped into a bigger container, or right out into the street, especially in towns. Yes, the street. In many medieval cities, people would shout something like "Gardyloo" from a window, then toss the waste out into the alley below. That word, gardyloo, came from the French phrase, garde-l'eau, meaning watch out for the water, though it wasn't really water. And people would just step aside, or try to. Imagine walking through a narrow town street, lined with shops, animals, carts, and suddenly, splash. Yeah, that happened. Shoes weren't really waterproof. In fact, many people wore thin leather that soaked everything in, so you'd just keep walking. Maybe wipe it in the grass later. Medieval luxury. But let's go back to the countryside. If you didn't have a chamber pot, or it was full, or maybe you just preferred not to use it, you'd go outside. Yep, into the fields, or the woods. There was a spot you knew, behind the hedge, near the chicken coop, maybe behind the woodpile. And if it was raining, you tried to find a tree. And if you lived near a stream, well, let's just say the water downstream wasn't always the cleanest. People didn't think about germs, because they didn't know what germs were. But they did know about smell, and bad smells were thought to make you sick. So they avoided nasty places, as much as they could. But that didn't always help, especially if everyone was doing the same thing, every day. Now, if you were rich, things looked a bit different. Let's take a little trip to a castle. The castle bathrooms weren't really bathrooms. They were called garderobes. Yep, garderobes. Sounds fancy, right? But they were simple stone rooms, usually attached to the outside of a tower or wall, with a hole in a bench, and a long chute underneath, that went down, and down, and down, sometimes into the moat, sometimes just into the air. You sat on the stone seat, in the cold, wind brushing your legs, and did your business. And if you looked down, you might see what others left before you. And what about wiping? Well, this is where it gets interesting, and also very unpredictable. People used what they had. Some used straw. Some used moss. In winter, snow. Yep. Others used smooth stones, scraps of cloth, or if they were lucky, old wool. In castles, there might be linen rags. But toilet paper, that didn't exist. So you wiped, carefully, slowly, and hoped there wasn't a splinter. Now, let's say it's nighttime. You're in bed, under your blanket. It's dark. There are no lamps, just a single candle. And suddenly, that stew strikes again. You don't want to walk through the muddy village, or risk meeting a wild pig, or even worse, someone else who's out there in the dark. So you try to hold it. And people did. A lot. Which caused other problems. Like stomach cramps, infections, or worse. Children were taught early on where to go and how to manage. There weren't schools, but there were rules. Some homes had little wooden stools with holes in them. Others just had a corner of the yard. And people learned to go quickly, quietly, and without fuss. Because, let's be honest, no one wanted to talk about it. But everyone did it. Every day. Just like we do now. Just differently. Now, let's visit a monastery. Monks had their own routines. They lived in silence, most of the day. But even monks had to go. In many abbeys, they built large communal latrines, long benches with holes, over running water. These were surprisingly advanced. The monks would sit, quietly, in rows, in silence. It was a calm moment. A daily ritual. And afterward, they would wash their hands. Yes, hand washing. Not always with soap, but with water. Because cleanliness, even if it wasn't understood the way we do now, was still considered holy. Let's return to our village now. It's morning again. The sun is barely up. There's frost on the ground, and you've got to empty the chamber pot. You carry it carefully, walking past neighbors doing the same. No one talks. No one makes eye contact. Just another chore. You find the ditch, pour it out, rinse the pot with a bit of water, if you have it, and head back inside. Maybe it's time for breakfast. Some bread, maybe cold porridge, and then, another long day begins. But for now, everything is quiet. Even the pigs are still sleeping. And that is how people in medieval times went to the bathroom. But there's still more. What did they eat that made them go so often? What did they do during plagues? How did they keep their clothes clean after all of this? And what did it really smell like? Stay with me, and we'll find out. Just don't fall asleep yet. But just as you set the chamber pot back under your bed, you notice something strange. There's a draft, coming from under the door. A chill you weren't ready for. And it reminds you of something important. Medieval people didn't just go to the bathroom in one way. No, there were many ways. And where you lived, or who you were, changed everything. Let's say you're not a villager anymore, but a traveler. Someone who's walking from one town to another, maybe looking for work, or just hoping to find shelter before nightfall. On the road there were no inns on every corner. And even the ones that did exist, they didn't always have beds, or bathrooms. So what did you do when nature called? Well, you found a bush, or a rock, or you just walked a little off the road, and hoped no one was watching. And that's how it was for most of Europe, for centuries. Even in bigger towns, public toilets weren't really a thing, unless you were in a few very developed cities. Some of the Roman ideas, like aqueducts and public latrines, had been lost. Some of those things did come back later in places like London and Paris. But for most people, you just used the world around you. And you learned to be quick, especially in winter. Winter. Imagine pulling down layers of wool, in the middle of the woods, with freezing wind, and no guarantee that your fire would still be lit when you returned. It makes you wonder how many times they just stayed inside, holding it, quietly, uncomfortably. And in some homes, they made toilet stools. A wooden chair, with a round hole in the seat, and a pot underneath. Some even had lids. It was sort of an early throne. Except, it didn't flush. But it did offer privacy, and warmth, if you were lucky. Let's now take a gentle turn towards something even more curious. What did they believe about going to the bathroom? This part is quietly fascinating. In medieval times, people had strong ideas about the body. They followed something called humorism. The belief that the body was filled with 4 humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Everything you did, what you ate, what you smelled, how you slept, even how often you relieved yourself, affected the balance of these humors. So, using the bathroom wasn't just about comfort. It was about keeping your body from getting sick. And constipation, that was dangerous, People believed that if waste stayed too long inside, it could poison the body. And in a way, they weren't completely wrong. But they had no science to back it up. Doctors of the time even prescribed laxatives, made of herbs like senna, or even goose fat. Some believed you should go once a day. Others said 3 times was better. And others just waited until the full moon. Yes, even the moon had something to do with it. They believed the moon controlled bodily fluids, just like it controlled the tides. Makes you think, doesn't it? Now let's gently visit a castle again. But this time let's go below it. Down into the darkness. Past the kitchens, past the storerooms, and into the stone tunnels beneath. These were the cesspits, huge underground chambers built to catch waste from the garderobes above. They were cleaned maybe once a year, or less. The smell was, unforgettable. Some people wore herbs around their necks to block it out. Lavender, mint, rosemary, and if you were assigned to clean it, you'd probably never stop smelling it, even weeks later. But here's the curious part. Castles were designed with these systems in mind. Engineers, even back then, found clever ways to direct rainwater to wash some of the waste away. In the best castles, they used sloped channels and natural flow to help clean the pits, just a little. So when you sat on that cold stone seat, high above, your waste dropped into a carefully designed hole. Kind of impressive, right? Still, it wasn't glamorous, and people knew that. Even the rich had accidents. Some kept perfumed cloths nearby, or used scented handkerchiefs, especially in the summer. Ladies of the court would sometimes carry small bouquets, not just for beauty, but to cover up unpleasant smells. They called these little bundles tussie-mussies. Such a pretty name, for such a strange purpose. And now, let's return to town, where the public streets weren't just dirty, they were often dangerous. Not just because of thieves, but because of what was underfoot. In some cities like York or London, there were open channels along the sides of the road. People tossed everything there: food scraps, laundry water, waste from chamber pots. The liquid ran slowly, and sometimes not at all. In summer, it baked in the sun. In winter, it froze solid. Children played nearby. Animals drank from it. Merchants sold bread just a few feet away. Life just went on. And in all this, people just adapted. Their noses grew used to it. Their clothes smelled of smoke, wool, and well, the world. And when guests came over, they didn't comment on the smell, because they smelled the same. Now, let's take a little look at something you might not expect. The bathhouse. Yes, medieval people did bathe. And bathhouses, especially in towns, were common, at least for a while. People would go to bathe, gossip, and yes, relieve themselves. Some bathhouses had benches with built-in seats for that very purpose. It wasn't always separate or private. Men and women sometimes bathed together, and using the bathroom, just another part of it. But this changed over time. As plagues spread, people feared water could carry sickness, and the bathhouses closed. And with them, another small place for bathroom relief was gone. So, what's the big picture? Well, medieval people didn't have plumbing, but they had patterns. They knew the spots, they used the tools, they built the systems, from chamber pots and cesspits to stools and stone seats, and they passed down this knowledge generation to generation, without ever writing most of it down, which is why we're here now, putting the puzzle back together, quietly, calmly, and with just a little curiosity. Because even though we all go, not everyone remembers how we used to. But now, you do. And there's still more. How did they manage during long journeys? What did they do when sick? What happened during festivals? And what was it like to go in a castle with no garderobe at all? Let's keep walking together, through history's hidden corners. Just, don't step in anything. So you keep walking. Your shoes are soft with wear, leather stretched thin, and the mud on the path is cold and quiet beneath your steps. Somewhere ahead, there's a village fair going on. You hear it before you see it. Gentle music, faint laughter, the clinking of mugs. But with all those people, where do they all go when they need to go? Let's take a moment to imagine that. You arrive in a village. It's late afternoon. Children are chasing chickens. The baker's oven is still hot, and the alehouse is full. You're not local, but no one seems to mind. Everyone is too busy enjoying themselves. But what happens when a child tugs at their mother's sleeve and whispers something only she hears? You can probably guess. In a world without porta-potties or public toilets, people relied on the edge of the woods or small alleyways between homes. Behind the blacksmith's shed, past the herb garden, near the compost heap. That's where they'd go. It wasn't private. It wasn't clean. But it worked. And no one talked about it. Because everyone did it. In fact, if you were lucky, someone in the village had a privy, a small wooden shack, with a hole dug into the ground beneath it. Sometimes it had a seat. Sometimes just a beam to squat on. Families shared it. Neighbors shared it. Spiders shared it too. And during festivals, ah yes. Let's imagine a warm summer's evening in the 14th century. The town square is glowing with torchlight. A juggler is tossing apples. A minstrel strums a gentle tune. And in the corner, someone quietly walks away, behind the carpenter's tent. There, among the barrels and broken wagon wheels, they squat, quickly, silently, before hurrying back. Because, when it's urgent, you find a way. And in medieval times, no one waited long. Holding it wasn't part of the plan. Not with the food they ate. Let's talk about that next. Because food and bathroom habits were deeply linked, even more than we think today. Their meals were heavy in grains, barley bread, porridge, pottage, a thick stew, root vegetables, and beans. Beans. Yes, they worked exactly how you'd expect. Most people had a fairly regular rhythm, simply because they ate the same things every day. Meat was rarer, often salted or smoked. Fresh fruit, sometimes, mostly apples or berries in season. Dairy was common, but not always trusted. It could go sour quickly. And water. Water was risky. In many places they drank ale instead. Weak homemade, barely alcoholic ale. Even children drank it. Because boiling water to make ale killed the germs they didn't even know existed. So yes, what they ate and drank directly shaped how often they needed to find a quiet corner. But what if you were sick? Not just a cold, but really sick. The kind of sick that makes your stomach twist. There were no bathrooms near the bed, and many people couldn't stand up at all. So, families kept bowls and cloths nearby. Sometimes a basket lined with hay. Yes, hay. Hay was cheap, dry, and somewhat absorbent. They also used moss, wool scraps, or even rags, and afterward, they threw it out the door, or into the cesspit, or they buried it, or they just didn't speak of it, because it was uncomfortable, and medieval life was full of little discomforts that no one dared to complain about. But some actually did something about it. Let's travel north for a moment, to a Scottish monastery. It's quiet here. Stone walls, cold floors, and the faint scent of candle wax in the air. The monks have their own retorters, special latrines built over flowing water. They were among the lucky few, because they cared for the soul, but also the body. They built clever systems with gravity, and channels, and drains, and they kept their habits clean, mostly. But even here, with all the planning, the stone seats were still cold, the wind still crept up the robes, and sometimes, the water below didn't flow fast enough. Now let's float gently back to the city, to the heart of London, where people lived close together. Windows were small, roofs slanted low, and narrow alleyways twisted like tangled ribbon. Some buildings had garderobe chutes, small wooden boxes sticking out over the street. Yes, that's right. When people used the bathroom, the waste fell directly down, onto the road, or onto the unfortunate soul walking beneath. So people learned to look up, or to walk quickly under windows. And most of all, they listened for the call, because people didn't just dump waste silently. They yelled something first. In French towns it was, "Gardez l'eau," watch out for the water. Imagine it, a sleepy night. You're walking back from a tavern, and someone leans out a window above you, holding a pot. "Gardez l'eau," they shout, and you jump to the side, just in time. And in all this chaos, someone had to clean. Let's talk about that person, the gong farmer. Yes. The least loved, least thanked, but most necessary job in all of medieval sanitation. They came at night, with buckets, gloves, if they were lucky, and long poles for stirring and scooping. They climbed down into the pits. They shoveled, they hauled, they gagged, and they dumped it all outside the city walls. Sometimes into rivers, sometimes into fields, sometimes into deep holes. They were paid well, better than some craftsmen, because no one else would do it. But they weren't invited to parties, and they weren't welcomed in most places. Still, they kept the city running, quietly, night after night. And now, let's shift gently into another question. What about women? How did women go to the bathroom in dresses, with layers, and no zippers or buttons? Here's something curious. Medieval women's clothing, while layered, was often loose. There were no tight undergarments like today. Many didn't wear any underpants at all. That's right. It made it easier. They could lift their skirts, squat, and be done. And in colder weather, they crouched near the hearth, sometimes with a pot nearby, sometimes just behind a hanging cloth. Privacy wasn't always possible, but practicality, always. They taught their daughters when and where and how, quietly, gently, just like their mothers taught them. And what about children? Children, even babies, needed their own care. Cloth diapers weren't common. Instead, mothers learned their babies' rhythms. They kept them close, held them away from the body when needed, and listened. Babies wore little more than tunics or swaddling. And toddlers, well, they learned fast. When your home has no bathroom, you learn where and when to go. Now, let's gently think about smells again. Because yes, everything we've talked about had a scent. And in a world without modern soap or bleach, they had to get creative. Burning herbs in the corner, boiling vinegar, sprinkling lavender. Some washed their hands with sand or ashes. And perfumed gloves. Oh yes, wealthy nobles sometimes wore gloves scented with ambergris or rose oil, not just for fashion, but to block out what was always lingering in the air. Still, for all the mess, for all the smells, people lived, they laughed, they cooked, they danced, and every time they needed to go, they found a way, just like we do. Different tools, different customs, but the same need, the same quiet moment, when you step aside, close your eyes, and feel a little lighter, even in a medieval world. But we still have more to explore. What about long sea voyages? How did knights relieve themselves on the battlefield? What secrets lie beneath the streets of old Paris? And why did some people refuse to go at all? Let's keep walking through these soft, forgotten shadows of the past. Quietly, calmly, together. It's a quiet evening now. The sun has barely set. A low fog starts to roll through the valley, soft and slow, like a blanket being pulled across the ground. You're in a village again. A little different this time. Closer to the coast, a fishing town. The wind smells like salt and wet wood. And the people, they've just finished eating. You hear the last clatter of bowls. You see someone washing their hands with cold water from a wooden bucket. And then, slowly, quietly, they begin to disappear into their homes, one by one. But outside the tavern, two boys are still talking. One of them is pointing at a large wooden pier. There's a row of boats tied to it, gently bobbing on the water. And just beside the last boat, there's a strange little shack. It looks like an outhouse, but it's built on top of the dock, right over the sea. That's not an accident. In some fishing towns, the sea was the toilet. When the tide was high enough, people would walk to these little wooden shacks called jakes or sea houses, and go right over the edge. The ocean would carry it away. Out of sight, out of mind. It was practical. No one liked it, but no one really questioned it either, because there was no sewer system. And in places like this, the sea did the job. Because there was a problem. In summer, when the tide was low, or when the wind changed, the smell came back. It rolled across the village like a fog of its own. And the fish, well, let's just say people didn't ask too many questions. They caught what they could, they cooked it, and they kept their thoughts to themselves. Now let's shift a little. What about those who traveled? Merchants, nobles, pilgrims. When they moved through the countryside, on horses or wagons, or even on foot, they didn't have inns at every turn. Sometimes they slept under the stars. And when nature called, they found a tree, or a bush, or just the far side of the road. They used what they could. Wool scraps, moss, a flat stone even. They didn't carry rolls of paper. But they did carry little cloths, tucked inside their bags. They'd wash them later, in a stream, in a bucket, or not at all, because comfort was rare on the road, and privacy, even rarer. But now, let's pause and picture something different. A castle, stone walls, torches, long tables covered in silver dishes. You might think castles had fancy bathrooms. Not quite. They had something called a garderobe, a narrow stone shaft built into the wall. At the end was a small bench, with a hole in it. You sat down, and your waist dropped down the shaft. Sometimes it fell into a pit, sometimes straight into the moat. Yes, that very same moat that surrounded the castle, the one enemies had to cross. Imagine that, swimming through more than just water. They didn't clean the garderobes often, but they did hang herbs in them. Lavender, rosemary, mint. It didn't fix the problem, but it made things bearable. Sometimes. Still, not everyone used them. Guards on patrol often went outside. Servants found hidden corners. And if the lord or lady was sick, they used a chamber pot, a bowl, right beside the bed, lined with cloth, carried away by someone else in the morning, usually by a servant called a night boy, or chamberer. They did not like their job, but they didn't have a choice. Let's float back to the streets now, this time to Paris. Paris. You might imagine beauty, but in the 1300s, it was a mess. Narrow alleys, no sewers, just gutters. They called them caniveau, open ditches running down the center of the street. When people finished their business, in a pot, a cloth, or the corner of a room, they tossed it into the gutter. It flowed downhill, carried by rain, or pushed by broom, and people walked beside it, stepping carefully, looking ahead, trying not to slip, because yes, it happened. There were rules about dumping waste, even laws, but no one followed them. Not really, because what else could they do? The city grew faster than its solutions, and the waste, it piled up, in the streets, in the alleys, in the air. But the palace, that was different. Let's step into the Louvre. Yes, that Louvre. Before it was a museum, it was a fortress, and later, a royal home. Inside, they tried to be more elegant. Gold bowls, perfumed cloths, attendants to clean, but the truth, even royalty couldn't escape the smell. Not really. They used chamber pots too. They wore heavy clothes, filled with layers of linen, wool and fur, and they still had to squat, or sit, or wait for someone to bring the pot. And at night, everyone rich or poor, kept something beside the bed, because no one wanted to go outside in the dark. Not with thieves, not with wolves, not with spirits. Yes, spirits. People believed the night was full of strange forces, so they stayed in. Even if the chamber pot was full, even if it spilled, even if it stank, they stayed close to the fire, wrapped in wool, and held it in just a little longer. Let's imagine that night together. A cold room, thick stone walls, a small fire in the hearth, flickering quietly. You're lying under 2 layers of blankets. The wind taps gently on the shutters, and beside your bed, a simple pot, covered with a cloth. Tomorrow someone will empty it. But for now, you pull the blanket higher. You breathe in the smoky warmth, and let the darkness settle in. But what about those who didn't have beds, or homes? They went where they could. Fields, abandoned carts, behind the town church. They weren't welcome inside, so they stayed at the edge, always near, but never truly part of the town. And when they relieved themselves, they hoped no one noticed. They hoped for rain, for silence, for tomorrow. And now, let's drift once more, to the sea. Let's board a ship. It's small, crowded, wooden beams above your head, creaking softly. The air is thick with salt, sweat, and old fish. You wonder, where do they go? The answer? They went over the side, or through a special hole in the floor called the head. That's where the term going to the head comes from. It was the front of the ship, where wind carried the smell away. If you were lucky, you had a rope to hold onto. If not, well, some didn't return. Yes, people fell. The sea took them, quietly, without warning. And pirates? They went the same way. There were no golden toilets, no fancy seats, just the wind, and the waves, and the hope that the next wave wouldn't be your last. Now, let's return. Back to the land. Back to the village. Back to where the hearth is glowing softly. A woman is sweeping the floor. A man is fixing a stool, and outside the stars are beginning to appear. It's time to rest. Everyone has used their pot, or gone behind the fence. And now, it's quiet. The world has settled. The smells still linger, but the people are calm. And tomorrow it will begin again. The same rhythm, the same habits, the same soft understanding, that even in a world without toilets, people made do, because they had to. And in their own way they managed, always. Even in the smallest, strangest, most hidden moments, they lived. Let's keep floating through these old forgotten habits, because there's still so much to uncover. How did knights go during battle? What happened in medieval hospitals? And what secrets did castle servants whisper about, behind thick stone walls? Let's go there next, quietly, together. There's a horse waiting outside a stable. Its breath rises in tiny clouds into the morning air. You can see a sleepy man inside, adjusting his belt, rubbing his eyes. It's early, still too early, but a bell is ringing somewhere in the distance, and it's time to ride. He grabs a soft cloth from a hook near the door, tucks it in his pouch, and steps out onto the damp path. Where is he going? To the next town. Maybe to deliver a letter, maybe to collect taxes, or maybe just to carry a message that's already late. You see, in the medieval world, messengers weren't just runners, they were travelers. And when you travel, well, nature comes with you. So let's ride with him. As the horse trots slowly along the dirt path, you pass trees, small hills, the edge of a fog-covered stream, and then, after a while, he stops. No towns yet, just quiet land, no one around. He slides off the saddle, walks a few paces off the road, and crouches behind a bush. That cloth, it comes out now, used gently, folded, tucked away again. He'll wash it later. Maybe, if he remembers. or if the smell reminds him. Now, let's drift away from him. Gently, to the other side of the kingdom. Inside a small monastery, where monks live quiet lives, silent ones. Every hour is a prayer, every step is careful, and every need is part of the routine, even the private ones. You might wonder, where do monks go? Well, let's walk into their cloister. Stone walls, gravel paths, and tucked into the far side, a building called the Red Ord. Funny word, right? It simply means latrine, their bathroom. But it was more than a toilet. It was part of their discipline. They went in silence. They sat quietly, and the waste dropped down into a stream running underneath the monastery. Yes, the monks had plumbing. Not like ours, but clever old plumbing. Gravity, water flow, simple stone channels, carved by hand. And it worked, as long as no one flushed too much at once. Sometimes, the stream froze in winter. That was a problem. The smell would linger. Ice would form in the wrong places. And yet, the monks still came, still sat, still waited, because discipline didn't stop for the weather, or the smell, or anything really. Now imagine this. In that same cold winter, in a house just outside the town, a young mother wakes up early. The baby is crying. She picks him up, rocks him gently near the fire, and then she sees the pot, full, from the night before. She sighs. She grabs the handle, carries it outside, careful not to spill, and pours it into the midden. The midden is where it all goes. Food scraps, rotten bones, old straw, and human waste, just behind the house, covered in flies in the summer, hard as stone in the winter. She doesn't complain. She just covers it again with dirt, and goes back inside. Ah, that's life. Just like yesterday, just like tomorrow. But now, let's walk further into the city. To a bathhouse. Yes, they had bathhouses. Big ones. With steam, with warm water, with gossip, and yes, with toilets. Or something close to it. In the corners there were little benches, with holes. People sat, they talked, they relieved themselves. And in some bathhouses, someone came to wipe them. Yes, that was a real job. A helper, a wiper. It wasn't glamorous, but it was part of the service. They even used soft wool cloths dipped in warm water, sometimes with herbs, lavender, chamomile, for comfort, and for the smell. Because these places were social. You didn't just go to clean yourself. You went to talk, to eat, to play games, and to relieve yourself. But over time, people stopped trusting public baths. They thought disease spread through them. They feared the heat made their skin weak. And so, many bathhouses closed, and people returned to chamber pots, and wooden seats, and garden corners. Speaking of gardens, did you know that many people had privies built right over their gardens? Yes, waste as fertilizer, human manure. It worked, but not for every plant, and not without smell. But in a world where nothing was wasted, even that had value. They'd let it sit, rot, turn into dark soil, and then spread it carefully among the crops. Sometimes, they even sold it. Can you imagine walking to the market, holding a bucket of waste, and trading it for a loaf of bread? It happened, more than you'd think. Now, let's walk back toward the castle. But this time, to the servants' quarters. Ah, much smaller, much darker, much quieter than the Lord's halls. You step through the low doorway, and you see 3 servants sharing a single room. They sleep on straw, wrapped in old blankets, and in the corner, a small wooden box. The makeshift toilet. Not even a pot, just a box. They take turns emptying it. Sometimes, if they remember, if they care, if the smell becomes too much. But usually, they just wait for the smell to fade, or for someone else to do it. And in some places, servants weren't even allowed indoor pots. They had to go outside, no matter the weather. Rain, snow, mud. They'd tiptoe through it all, hoping not to slip, or be seen, or scolded. Ah, what a life. Quiet, tiring, and full of small strange rituals like this. Now, let's listen. Can you hear it? In the distance, a bell, a church bell. It's dawn again, and people are waking. The baker is stretching his arms. The blacksmith is stoking the fire. And outside their doors, small puddles, little signs of last night's habits. Because yes, even in towns with rules, people still emptied their pots into the street. They did it early, before the guards walked by, before anyone noticed. A quick dump, a splash, a door closed again. Done, gone, until the next night. And the children, they didn't care. They ran through the streets anyway, stepping around puddles, jumping over ditches, sometimes not even noticing the smell, because to them, it was normal. That's just how life was. No flushes, no sprays, just chamber pots, dirty alleys, and the wind. Now, let's take a slow walk up the hill. There's a little inn up there, with a thatched roof, and a warm fire, and inside, travelers sit at long wooden tables, eating stew, drinking ale, telling stories, laughing, burping, and slowly, one by one, they stand, yawn, stretch, and ask the innkeeper, "Where's the privy?" And she points to the back, a little shed, no door, just a hole in the ground, and a bit of straw, and a view of the stars. Some don't bother. They go behind the barn, by the fence, near the old tree. It doesn't matter much, not really, as long as no one sees. And the innkeeper, she just shrugs. She's seen it all, smelled it all, and tomorrow, she'll sprinkle ashes, to keep the flies away, to dry the ground, to hide the truth, for a little while. And now, let's go further than we've gone before. Beyond the village, beyond the castle, beyond the fields, to a monastery, carved into the side of a cliff. Yes, really, they exist, high above the world. Stone steps, cold air, and silence. The monks here, they live alone, each in a small stone cell, just a bed, a cross, a candle, and a bucket. Yes, a bucket. No plumbing, no stream, no pit, just the old way. And once a week, they carry their bucket down the steps, slowly, carefully, and empty it into the compost pit. No one talks, no one complains, they just nod, and climb back up, back into their cell, back into silence. And now, you are walking, still drifting. Your eyes feel heavy, but your mind curious. Because this world, this strange forgotten world, isn't so far away. It's in the stones, in the soil, in the old wooden beams, in the words we still use, like head, privy, chamber pot, jakes. They're echoes of lives lived quietly, messily, and always humanly. I think it's time to rest again. We've wandered far tonight, through mottes, through monasteries, through middens. But there's still more, still stories hiding behind castle walls, still secrets buried under straw floors. So let's keep going next time. But for now, let your eyes close, let the stillness return, and drift, just drift. It's a little past midnight. There's a storm above the village. Not angry, just steady. Raindrops falling on thatch. Pat, pat. A rhythm soft enough to lull a whole street to sleep. But one house still has a candle glowing. Barely. A flicker. Inside, an old man stirs under a woolen blanket. He turns, sighs, and feels the need. Not strong, not urgent, but there. He groans quietly, and sits up. His knees pop, his back stretches, and slowly he swings his feet to the floor. The cold wood stings his soles. He reaches beside the bed. His fingers find the chamber pot. Wooden, carved years ago. Still strong. He lifts his tunic, and waits. Silence. Then trickles. Then stillness again. He wipes with moss wrapped in cloth. Something he's done since he was a boy. He doesn't think about it. He just moves, half asleep, like always. And when he's done, he tucks the pot back under the bed. Not emptied. Not yet. That's for morning, or whoever wakes first. Let's slip from that room, back into the street. The rain has stopped now. Clouds drift past the moon like ghosts with nowhere to go. And if you walk just a little further, you'll come to a house with no roof. Just ruins now. But once, it belonged to a tanner, someone who worked with leather, skins, hides, and something else. Urine. Yes, tanners used human urine to soften animal hides. It broke down the fats, made the leather bend. People used to collect urine in jars, sometimes sold it to the tannery, sometimes just left it out near the door, hoping the tanner would take it away. You won't believe this, but in some towns there were piss pots placed on the streets, and people were encouraged to contribute, voluntarily, to help the leather trade. Of course, it smelled bad. Tanneries were usually outside the main village, by a river, where waste could flow away. But the air, it carried the scent back, always back, especially on warm days. But people needed leather, for shoes, belts, pouches, armor. So they ignored the smell, held their breath, and kept walking. Now imagine this. A little boy runs barefoot past the tannery gates. He holds his nose. He laughs. He yells something rude about the stink. And the tanner, he just shrugs. He's heard it all before. He dips his hands back into the vat, where skins float in old sour urine. He doesn't flinch. It's just another day, another hide, another hour closer to supper. And speaking of supper, let's walk down to the kitchen of a large manor. Big stone ovens, hanging herbs, and two cooks arguing about salt. In the corner, a bucket, old, wooden, not for food, for waste. Because when you cook all day, you stay in one place. Even for that, no time to run outside, no chamber pot under the table, just the bucket, with a lid. Sometimes, if they remembered, the servants took turns emptying it, usually outside the kitchen door, sometimes into the pig trough. Yes, the pigs didn't mind. In fact, they liked it. Strange, but true. And you know, in many medieval farms, the pigs ran free, through the streets, the alleys, even the privy pits. Why? Because pigs are natural cleaners. They eat almost anything, even that. And so they helped keep the waste down, a living solution to a daily problem. Now let's leave the manor behind, and drift down a winding path into a mountain village, quiet, sleepy, tucked into fog. And on the edge of this village, a tiny stone house sits beside a stream. It's been here for 200 years, longer maybe. And outside the door, a small outhouse. But not just any outhouse. This one is built on stilts, right above the water. The waste drops straight into the stream. Efficient? Yes. Clean? No. But it works. Until someone downstream drinks from the same water. Ah, that happened more than once. You might wonder, did they know it was dangerous? Sometimes. Sometimes not. But water was water, and clean rivers were rare, so they took the risk. Boiled it if they could. But not always. Some just drank and hoped. And when illness came, they blamed the air, the stars, the bad humors. They didn't know. Not really. Not yet. But they had guesses, theories. Some thought a dirty soul caused stomach pain. Others said demons lived in bad food. Still others swore by prayers whispered before every sip. Whatever helped them feel safer, calmer, in control. Let's drift again, to a field. Golden, tall grass swaying in the wind. And somewhere in the middle, a girl crouches behind a bush. She's alone, working, picking berries, watching sheep. And when nature calls, she doesn't think twice. She just goes, quietly, quickly, and wipes with leaves, sometimes soft, sometimes sharp. It's always a gamble. She learns which to avoid, which to trust. It's knowledge passed down from her mother, and her mother's mother. Not written, just known. And if you look closely, you'll see the same leaves near every path. Half torn, half used. Evidence of 100 quiet moments like this, scattered across the land. Invisible history. Now, let's return to town. To the market square. Bustling, busy. But just behind the butcher's stall, there's an alley. Narrow, dark, with a shallow trench running down the middle. It's the open sewer. Yes, right there, between houses, carrying waste through the town. It flows slowly, always toward the river. But when it rains, it overflows. And when it doesn't rain, it dries up, cracks, smells. Children play near it anyway. Dogs sniff, rats run. Butchers dump blood into it. Bakers dump flour water. Fishmongers, well, you can imagine. It's all there, in that little trench. The town's secret, hidden in plain sight. And yet, people live. They laugh, they marry, they sing, all just a few feet from the waste. It's strange, how humans adapt, how we learn to live among the things we try not to see. And now, let's slip into a church. Quiet, candlelit, still. There's a confessional in the corner, and behind it, a small chamber, used by the priests, for resting, for writing, and for relieving themselves. There's a pot under the bench, always, covered with linen, and changed by the acolyte, who carries it outside, down a narrow path, to a hidden garden. There, among the roses, is the church's midden, carefully maintained, blessed by prayer, surrounded by flowers. It's almost beautiful, but underneath, it's the same as everywhere else. Just waste, wrapped in reverence. And perhaps, that's what all of this is. A quiet attempt to make the unpleasant parts of life a little softer, a little quieter, wrapped in cloth, hidden behind stone, carried away by servants, or pigs, or rivers, but always there, always returning. And now, night deepens. The stars are fewer, the air cooler, even the mice have stopped moving. And in a castle tower, a guard shifts in his chair. He feels it coming. That old pressure. He sighs, takes his torch, and walks to the corner. There's a hole, right in the stone, a garderobe, open to the air. He sits, he waits, and the wind rushes up from below. Cold, sharp, he shivers, but he finishes, and he returns to his post. Nothing said, nothing unusual, just part of the job. You see, even in stone towers, even in golden halls, the need remains, humble, unchanging, and so, they built their lives around it, found ways, made rules, told stories, sometimes whispered, sometimes loud, but always human, always the same. From kings to cooks, from monks to maids, everyone went. It's quiet again. Not the kind of silence you hear when nothing is happening, but the kind that hums with slow little stories, just waiting to be noticed. A few birds are starting to stir. Not quite dawn, just those moments before it all begins again. But we're still in the night, still in the shadows. And tonight our feet carry us to a place far from villages and castles, to a road, long, winding, endless, used by pilgrims, travelers, wanderers, people who didn't always have a bed, or even a wall. Imagine walking all day, dust in your teeth, sore feet, and then the need. Nowhere to go, nothing but trees, and maybe a bush or two. Yes, most of them just went, wherever the moment allowed, behind a tree, beside a rock, or sometimes, if they were bold, right along the road. Turn a little, kneel down, hope no one saw. You'd be surprised how quickly the human body adapts to such things. After days on the road, it becomes normal, just part of the rhythm, and when it rained, well, you waited, or didn't. Let it all go with the storm. And if you're picturing them wiping with soft cloth or rolls of fine linen, nope, usually it was leaves, grass, maybe a handful of moss if the woods were kind. If not, nothing. Just shake, stand, and carry on. Now close your eyes and picture a roadside inn, wooden, creaky, warm light spilling from a window. Inside, a fire crackling, ale sloshing, voices rising and falling like waves. And tucked behind the stable, a row of wooden seats, open air, no walls, just a bench with holes, and beneath it, a pit, used by everyone, guests, stable hands, and travelers who couldn't hold it. There's no privacy, no doors, just acceptance, and maybe a little quickness. Inns didn't often clean those pits. They just built new ones once the old ones were full, covered them with dirt, moved the bench, started again. That's how it was. And you wouldn't believe this, but some folks brought their own cloths, rags, scraps, to wipe. They didn't trust the leaves, didn't like the bark. And once they used them, they didn't throw them away. They cleaned them, washed them in rivers, hung them to dry, again and again, until they were too thin to use. Then they burned them, or buried them. Simple, quiet, reused until gone. Now, let's follow a young shepherd, barefoot, wool cloak around his shoulders. He's walking along a cliff edge, guiding his sheep home. The wind is strong, his stomach, not so. A bit of bad cheese from lunch. He stops, looks around, just open land. So, he crouches, grimaces, waits, relieved. No one saw. He wipes with dry grass, rubs his hands in moss after, sniffs, nods, keeps walking. This was life, out in the world, living with it, among it, every day. And you know, people didn't talk about these things. Not much, not loudly, but everyone knew what to do, how to go, when to wait, when not to. They had their own wisdoms, passed by gesture, by quiet advice. For example, in one village, an old woman swore by nettles, stung a little, but cleaned better. She said it kept her from catching the belly worms. And in another town, they only used flat river stones, smooth, heavy, cool, washed and reused, stacked in a neat pile by the privy door. People get creative when they have to. And now let's step back into a home, a humble one. Just one room, one fire, one bed, and a chamber pot. Same one the whole family used. Father, mother, children, even grandma. They took turns, sometimes waited, sometimes didn't. Privacy, not much. But shame, not really either. It was just part of life. They laughed about smells, made jokes about noises. It kept things light, made it easier. The pot was emptied every morning, usually by the oldest child. He'd carry it outside, across the small yard, to the edge of the path, and pour it into the grass. Sometimes the chickens gathered round, pecked, scratched, sometimes not. And afterward, the pot was rinsed in a barrel, the same barrel used for washing feet. Cooking water came from the well, always the well, always cleaner than the rest. You see, water was precious, and clean water, even more. so waste was kept far from the source. That was one rule everyone knew. Even the drunkest man in town wouldn't dump a pot near the well. He'd be chased with sticks, or worse, be made to drink from it. And speaking of drunk men, let's wander down a city alley, narrow, lit by torchlight. There's music in the tavern next door, laughter, feet stomping, and outside, a man leans against the wall, eyes glazed. He groans, fumbles with his belt, and lets it go. Right there, on the cobbles. No shame, no second thought. It ran down the stones, joined a dozen other streams. Gone in seconds, but the smell lingered, always did. By morning the tavern boys would splash it clean, sort of, just throw water on it, maybe sweep it, then hang herbs by the windows. Lavender, mint, even crushed rosemary, to mask the odor, just enough, for a few hours. The cities had rules. They did, laws against peeing in the streets. But who enforced them? Usually no one. Unless someone made a scene, or did it in front of a church. Then, a fine, or a bucket of cold water dumped on their head. Sometimes both. But the streets were mostly alive, loud, smelly, sticky with life. And part of that life, waste. People stepped over it, walked around it, laughed at it, occasionally cursed it. But no one pretended it wasn't there. Now let's walk quietly, very quietly, into the chambers of a noblewoman. Tall windows, silk drapes, candles flickering, and beside her canopied bed, a gilded pot, painted with vines. Beautiful, almost too nice to use, but still used. Every night, a servant would empty it by morning, rinse it with rosewater, dry it in the sun, replace it under the bed. Always ready, always hidden behind beauty. That was the way of the noble houses. Make even the mess look elegant. Sometimes they even named their chamber pots. Gave them nicknames, silly ones. Sir Whiffington, Old Gusher. Ah, humor helped. Always, even the lords and ladies had to laugh. They were human too. And now, let's sit. Just for a moment. Close our eyes. Breathe in through the nose, and out, and think about how every soul, rich, poor, old, young, all had to stop, every day and answer the same call. Some in marble rooms, some in fields, some beneath stars, some in candlelight. It didn't matter how much gold you had. When nature knocked, you opened. And it's funny how something so basic, so quiet, tells you more about a time than almost anything else. Not the battles, not the kings, but how they went, where they went, what they used. That's where the truth sleeps. In pots, in trenches, in whispers behind stables, in a mossy cloth washed by a girl at sunrise. You can almost hear them, can't you? The soft sounds of a village waking, the clink of a pot lid, the squish of wet earth, the rustle of leaves, and then, the hush, as it all begins again. It's getting colder in the story now, the kind of chill that sinks into wooden beams, wraps around straw roofs, and curls beneath woolen blankets. The season has turned. Winter. You might wonder what happens when everything freezes, when even the chamber pot's contents become stiff as stone by morning. Let's take a breath, and walk into a home during a medieval winter's night. Fire glowing, only slightly. It's mostly for light now. Wood is low. Outside, frost laces the window like a spider's web. Inside, a man shifts in bed. His wife stirs beside him. She groans softly. She needs to go. But the chamber pot is cold. Very cold. She hesitates, then throws off the furs. Her feet hit the stone floor. A little hiss through her teeth. She grabs the pot, squats beside the hearth. It steams, slightly, and afterward, she puts it back, covers it with a cloth, crawls beneath the furs again. No words, just the quiet sounds of people, surviving the night. Now, in larger houses, in monasteries, or town halls, they had something better during the winter. A garderobe. Yes, we've heard this word before. But in winter, it had a special role. You see, the stone shaft that carried waste away from the building, it often froze, solid, like a horrible ice sculpture, which meant the smell disappeared. Everything was trapped, preserved in the cold. Some people even preferred winter. They said the air was cleaner, the privies quieter, the world softer. But when spring returned, oh no, it all melted, suddenly, like an avalanche of stink. People avoided those areas for days. They burned herbs, hung mint in doorways, and muttered small prayers to keep the smells from clinging to their clothes. Some monks even fasted, said it was purifying, said the stink was the body reminding them of its weakness. And for the really poor, the ones in huts far from towns, well, they didn't have garderobes, no chamber pots, just the edge of the woods. Even in winter, they wrapped their feet in cloth, braced themselves, stepped outside,
And sometimes, the snow welcomed them, soft, quiet, a strange sort of peace. They'd squat quickly, use snow to clean. Yep, snow. Cleaned better than moss. Stung a little, but left you fresh. A young girl once said it made her feel like a princess, for just a moment. Strange how even in the coldest places, people find little joys.
Now let's drift to a small castle, not one with towers and banners. No, just a manor, built on a hill, owned by a retired knight. He had a wooden box in the corner of his room, with a cushion, soft fur on top, looked like a stool, but inside, a pot. A servant checked it every morning, but during winter, he used it more often, didn't want to cross the icy courtyard to the castle's outer garderobe. He'd sit on his fur-lined throne, murmur to himself, maybe read a few verses, and after he finished, he'd call softly for Marta. She'd arrive with gloves, a cloth over her mouth, and take it away. No words exchanged, just a nod, and then the fire was stirred, and life went on. In noble homes, the chamber pots were sometimes made of copper, held heat longer, didn't chill the skin quite so fast. They were polished, inscribed, sometimes gifted at weddings. A nobleman once gave his bride a pot shaped like a rose. He said, "Even roses must be fed." Romance, medieval style. But what of cities during the winter? Ah, the streets. They became ice paths, covered in slush, puddles of brown. You never knew what was beneath. Children slipped on waste piles. Merchants cursed while trying to push carts through frozen muck. Some people stayed indoors for days, afraid of falling, afraid of stepping in the wrong spot and carrying it into their homes. Shoes were scraped at the doorstep, boots beaten against the wall. And even then, the smell crept in, so people stuffed herbs in their shoes, dried thyme, lavender, even orange peel if they were lucky. It helped, a little. And speaking of orange peel, did you know some noblewomen used it to scent their chamber pots? They'd crush the peel, add dried rose petals, even a drop of oil, placed it at the bottom of the pot. So each time they used it, the smell was masked, turned into something almost pleasant. Almost. One lady wrote in her letters, "My chamber feels more garden than gutter." She was proud of her scenting method, even taught it to her daughters. And the daughters, they each kept a sachet of crushed herbs in their pocket, called them nose purses. If they had to use a public privy, they'd hold the nose purse under their nose, breathe deeply, then do what needed to be done. Now, imagine a winter festival, a large gathering, people dancing, drinking, celebrating the solstice. And somewhere nearby, a trench, dug into the snow, with canvas stretched around it. A makeshift latrine, steam rising. People took turns, stepped carefully, shared torches, laughed about it. Yes, even in the cold, even while going, they found joy. They were good at that, finding joy in the strange. And in monasteries, the monks had rules. In winter they didn't speak during morning business. Too cold, too serious. They lined up silently, waited, entered the stone seat rooms, one by one. Each had a bucket of hot water, to rinse after, used sparingly. Then they scrubbed their hands with ashes. Not soap. Ashes. Rubbed in, rinsed out. Clean enough. And the elderly? They struggled in winter. Joints stiff. Hard to squat. Hard to move. So families helped, gently. A grandson guiding a grandmother to the pot. A daughter cleaning the stone slab near the hearth. They did it with kindness, quiet understanding, even a small kiss on the forehead afterward. No shame, just love. That's how winters passed, in slow, gentle routines. And now, just for a moment, let's sit beside one of them. A widow, wrapped in wool, her hands around a mug of warm ale. She glances toward her chamber pot. It's covered with cloth. She whispers, "Tomorrow's cleaning day," then sips, and hums a song older than time. A song passed by grandmothers, who taught not just cooking, but where to go, how to go, when to go. She finishes the ale, blows out the candle, and sleeps. And so shall we. But not yet. There's still more to see, more to know. Let's begin tonight with sound. Not words, not voices, but the sounds of the past. Imagine it. The soft clatter of wooden sandals on stone. The wind hissing through cracks in the shutters. And there, that slosh, that slow, careful slosh. A chamber pot, being carried. It's early morning in a town, not large, but busy enough. And the sun hasn't risen yet. There's a woman with a linen cloth over her shoulder. She walks with care, a shallow metal pot in her hands. Every step she watches, her eyes on the path, careful not to spill. She's heading to a small alley, not to be alone, but to empty it. You see, there were people in towns, mostly women, sometimes boys, who did this every morning. Pot carriers, waste haulers. No badge, no title, just quiet work that nobody spoke of, but everyone relied on. She steps into the alley, takes a breath, lifts the pot, tips it into the gutter, and just like that, it joins the others. Yes, the gutters. These narrow trenches ran down the middle or side of streets. Rain would carry everything away. But on dry days, it just sat there. You could walk through town and smell what had happened the night before. Some said they could guess what people ate, based on the smell. Stew, or beans, or worse. City life came with a price. But it wasn't just chamber pots. No, people also used what was called the midden. It was a kind of dump, usually behind a house, sometimes fenced off, sometimes just a pile. Everything went in. Ash from the hearth, bones from dinner, broken pottery, and yes, human waste. They'd cover it with straw, sometimes with soil, to hold the smell in. It became a mountain of filth and history. Modern archaeologists, they love middens. They dig through them and find pieces of lives, lost combs, dolls, half a shoe, or even a forgotten tooth. It tells them what people ate, how they lived, what they wore, and what they threw away. Funny, isn't it? What people once wanted to forget, now tells us everything. Let's walk back into the town again. But this time, into a bakery. The baker's up early. His wife stirs near the back room. The warmth from the oven fills the house. She opens a wooden box. Inside is the family's chamber pot. She frowns. It's full, too full. She lifts it with one hand, carries it toward the back of the shop, and out. But here's the strange part. Sometimes the waste didn't go into the gutter. It went into the garden. Yep, the garden. Human waste, as fertilizer. Now don't cringe. They had their reasons. You see, night soil, that's what they called it, was rich in nitrogen. Vegetables grew better, faster, bigger, so they used it, especially in small towns and farmhouses. But they tried to be careful. Covered it, let it sit, mixed it with straw or ash. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. Some families even had compost privies, a pit in the ground, covered with wood. They used it daily, and every few weeks, added straw, lime, or earth. Over time, it became dark, rich soil. They believed it gave potatoes their flavor. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't, but they swore by it. Let's now visit an inn, a roadside place. Travelers stop here for ale, soup, and rest. It has no garderobe, no sewer, just a yard behind it. And in the yard, a wooden bench, with a hole, covered by a lid. Guests line up at night, some with candles, some just following the moonlight. They step behind the shed, lift the lid, sit quietly, and beneath, a pit. Deep, stinking, buzzing with flies. The owner throws lime in every few days, to keep the smell down. He doesn't clean it. No. He waits for rain. When the pit floods, it's washed into the woods. Simple, and kind of sad. But there's another layer to all this. Pun intended, clothing. You might ask, did medieval people wear underwear? And the answer is, yes. Most did. Linen breeches. Soft if you were rich, rough if you were poor. Some men tied them with cords. Some women wore long shifts. And when they went to the bathroom, they just lifted it. Or untied the strings. No zippers. No buttons. Just knots. Knots and habits. Over time those knots became fast. Muscle memory. Like tying your shoes. Just part of life. A young farm boy once wrote in a letter, poorly spelled, scratched into bark. I do not like when the wind lifts my shift while I squat in snow. Neither would we. But he added, I sing then, it helps. Even then, people used song, to pass the time, to distract, to endure. Let's go to the nuns. Their life was different, quiet, structured, but even they had to go. They used a privy connected to their cloister, stone seats, built over a stream, but they prayed before entering, and after leaving. They believed the body was a vessel, even its filth, a part of God's creation. They believed even waste returned to the earth, so they left in silence, never spoke of it, never joked, but they cleaned, every day, with herbs and cloth. wearing gloves, made of waxed wool. Clean hands, clean soles. Let's pause for a moment and look at the tools. Cloth squares for wiping, washed and reused, hung on lines, sometimes shared. Wooden sticks with soft ends, called gom sticks, used in certain regions. Flat stones, rounded bones, and of course, moss. Softest moss was prized, stored in pouches, kept near beds. Mothers taught daughters how to pick the best kind, near streams, beneath certain trees. A lost art now, but then, a daily detail. And what about night sounds? The groans, the creaks, the soft shuffle of feet, someone getting up to go. Fire low, air cold, you'd hear the lid lift. A small sigh, and then silence again. The house settled, blankets shifted, and sleep returned. It's all so ordinary, so human, yet lost. So many of their lives existed in that space between sleeping and waking, between holding and letting go, between knowing and forgetting, and we're just now remembering it. We'll stop here for tonight. You've done well to stay with me. Still awake. That's rare, but there's more, much more. So, picture a castle again. Stone walls, echoing halls, and just the faint smell of time. In our last whispers together, we stood among the nuns and chamber pots. Tonight, let's turn to a new layer of life. The way people cleaned themselves afterward. Because, ah yes, they did. Just not how we think today. Let's begin with the water. It was precious. In towns, it was fetched daily, bucket after bucket from wells or streams. And not for drinking first. No, that was often wine or ale. This water, it was for washing. And after using the chamber pot or the privy, people did wash, when they could. Not always with soap, not always with cloth. Sometimes just a splash, a rinse, a small ritual in silence. In the countryside, washing often meant the river, cold, moving, alive. You'd see someone kneeling by the edge, sleeves rolled, their hands in the water, slowly stirring it, like they were waking the stream. They might rinse cloth squares there, or simply let the water run over their fingers. Some even said the river knew what it was taking away, that it remembered, and if you whispered to it, it wouldn't tell. But in cities, it wasn't so poetic. People built public bathhouses. You might not think that fits into our bathroom story, but oh, it does. Because those bathhouses were the only time many could be truly clean. And so much happened there. Picture it, a wooden structure, steam rising from the roof, a low hum of voices inside. Inside, tubs, filled with hot water, smelling faintly of herbs, sometimes rosemary, sometimes lavender, sometimes just ash. You'd undress, sit in the warm water, and for a few precious moments, forget the smells outside, forget the pots, the midden, the gutters, just warm water, and maybe a small wooden paddle, used to scoop and pour down your back, over your hands, onto your feet. And afterward, you'd dry with cloth. And yes, often, you'd relieve yourself right there. The bathhouses had small privy pits built in. A convenience, a necessity. And after that, rinse again, then go. There was a woman in one village. Her name's lost now, but people called her Morella of the Cloth. She kept dozens of cloths just for wiping, and every night she'd boil them. Yes, boil. In a large iron pot. She said it made them holy again. Then hang them, in the dark, by the fire. Next morning, they'd be dry, stiff, but clean. She'd hum as she folded them. Not a song anyone knew, just her own tune. A tune for cloth and silence. But not everyone had cloth. Many used moss, soft and green, gathered from under trees, or beside old wells. Others used hay, or leaves. Some even used wool scraps. Rough but better than nothing. And if nothing was around, they used their hand, then washed. But let's not forget the traveling folk. Merchants, pilgrims, jugglers, always on the road, sleeping in barns or beneath trees. Where did they go? Anywhere. Behind a bush, beside a rock. Sometimes into a ditch dug by hand. But they were careful, always downstream, always far from where animals drank. Some even carried small shovels, just enough to cover. And in the morning, they moved on, leaving only the faintest trace. In castles, things could be more refined and more disturbing. You might recall the garderobes, stone rooms jutting out, over empty air or pit. But who cleaned the pit, or emptied it, when it filled? Servants. Unseen, unspoken, often sick. They wore cloth over their mouths, soaked in vinegar, to kill the smell. Used shovels, buckets, their hands, sometimes, and they did it at night, while others slept. And when the wind blew just wrong, all that filth, it drifted up, through cracks, into rooms. A reminder. You might be noble, but even your waste still stinks. Let's drift now into a monastery. Early morning, chanting echoes in stone halls. The monks rise in silence. They file out, one by one. But before breakfast, there is one stop. A row of seats, carved into cold stone, each with a small opening. They sit, robes gathered, and they wait. No talking, no rush. They listen, to the wind, to the dripping water nearby. Then rise, rinse hands in a basin, made of bronze, and leave. That's it. No paper, no flush, just a moment, between chants, to be human. There's something so quiet in all of this, isn't there? All this waste, all this mess, and yet so much dignity. So much effort. They didn't think about germs, or hygiene, or sterility. They thought about order, about balance, about keeping things manageable. And the children, they were taught early how to squat without falling, how to wipe without waste, how to carry a pot without spilling. Mothers whispered tips at dusk. Grandfathers told stories of icy mornings, and boys dared each other to pee the farthest. Childhood, always the same, even with chamber pots. Now let's walk to a fairground. The colors, the noise, the crowds, but nowhere to go. So people stepped behind tents, or used pits dug by organizers, and sometimes just went in the straw. The ground absorbed it, the smell lingered, and by nightfall, the fair became ripe. Vendors tossed sawdust, poured vinegar, lit incense, trying to mask what couldn't be masked, but they danced anyway, and drank, and laughed, because that was life. Not perfect, but full. 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 Tamen was fa. Full hoster ho ho. We forget sometimes how recently toilets arrived. We think clean water is normal, that privacy is expected. But for over 1,000 years, people lived like this. Quietly, patiently, and sometimes with pride. Not because it was pretty, but because it was theirs. Their moss, their cloth, their place in the cold wind. And when it froze, they still went, maybe with a shiver, maybe with a prayer, but always, back to bed, back to dreams. And you, still here, still listening, then perhaps, you've found some calm in this strange tale. A story of waste, that somehow feels clean. So last time, we stepped through fairgrounds and monasteries, through cloth and moss and silence. Tonight, let's walk behind the castle walls once more. But not just any walls. The royal ones. Because if you've ever wondered how kings and queens handled that part of life, the part no one wants to talk about, well, you're not alone. Even they had to go. Even kings had to squat. Even queens had to wipe. And you won't believe who helped them. Let's start with the groom of the stool. Yes, that was a real job, an important one. Maybe one of the most trusted roles in all the court. And not because of the task itself, but because of the conversations that came with it. Let me explain. Each morning, the king would rise. He'd be handed a cloth robe. He'd walk barefoot to a small private room, a wooden chamber within his own chamber. There sat the stool. It looked like a throne. It even had embroidered cushions. But in the center, a hole. Beneath it, a pot. The groom would be there, always, waiting. He would adjust the robes, offer the water, and sometimes, hold the king's hand. Why? Because while the king sat, he talked about politics, about enemies, about what nobles had betrayed him. This was his most vulnerable moment, and whoever was near heard secrets. Some grooms of the stool became powerful, wealthy, advisors. They began with the pot, and ended up shaping kingdoms. Strange, isn't it? The road to power, through waste. And the pot they used? It was made of pewter, or brass. Sometimes even porcelain, if you were fancy enough. It was cleaned after every use, with vinegar, and sometimes, dried rose petals, to keep it smelling like something else. Something softer. Queens too had their own arrangements. They didn't have grooms of the stool, but they had ladies. Trusted women. Silent, swift. Their job was to handle everything. Clothes, hair, and yes, relief. Queens had to be discreet. They couldn't just slip away during court. So sometimes, they sat on cushioned seats, hidden in wardrobes, or on private garden chairs, with hollowed centers. And underneath, a lady in waiting would quietly slide the pot in. No one would hear. No one would see. Then the queen would nod, and the pot would be carried away. There's a story, lost in dusty scrolls, about Queen Isolde of Normandy. They say she had lavender-scented wipes, made from imported cotton, used once, burned after. She never used the same cloth twice. Her chambermaids kept a fire burning just for them, every day. Every cloth, gone in smoke. She believed it kept her soul clean. and perhaps it kept her mind calm too. Outside the castles though, outside all that silk and secrecy, people were clever, inventive. They had to be. Because even if they didn't have royal pots or chambermaids, they had needs. So let's talk about something often forgotten, the night soilmen. Ah yes, in cities, where so many people used pots, those pots had to be emptied. Sometimes by the user, sometimes by someone paid to do it. Late at night, when the streets were quiet, when no one would notice the stink, they carried big wooden buckets. They wore leather aprons. Their faces were always turned down, because what they carried was shame, but also necessity. The contents, thrown into designated pits, or used on fields, mixed with ash, sometimes. The smell, always there. But people got used to it. It became the scent of living. The scent of we're still here. There were rules too. Ah, so many strange rules. Some towns had curfews on emptying waste. Others banned it during rain. Some required it to be poured only in one direction, away from churches, away from bakeries, toward the tanners. Yes, the tanners. Because their shops already reeked of hides, lime and rot. One more smell didn't make much difference. Let's walk now down a narrow alley in 1350 London. The sun is gone. The candles flicker from behind wooden shutters. A woman opens her window, looks both ways, lifts her pot, and tips it out. It hits the cobblestone with a splash. You might hear her whisper, "Gardilou." Yes, that was the warning. A strange word, derived from French, meaning watch the water. But it wasn't water. Not really. And if you didn't listen, well, your shoes might regret it. Or your hat. Children were taught this word early, not in school, just by living. They'd hear it and step aside, like it was part of a song. Gardilou, step left, keep walking. Life moved around the waist, always did. In the colder months though, things changed. Pots froze, stools cracked, the scent faded, replaced by frost. People still went, but slower. They shivered, they hesitated, and afterward, they stood by the fire, warming hands that had done what they must. Even nobles did this. Kings, queens, monks, maids, all waiting for that little moment of warmth. A reward for a task done in the dark. Let's not forget, they didn't have paper. They had rags. They had leaves. Sometimes even snow. Yes, snow. Cold, cleansing, and silent, like wiping with silence itself. A peasant once said, or so the legend goes. Snow wipes the body, and clears the sins. That's how deeply these rituals were felt. And now, because in every village, every town, the pigs, chickens and goats also added to the mix. They went wherever, and people stepped carefully. It wasn't strange, it wasn't bad, it just was. Mothers warned toddlers, watch your step, or your boots'll kiss the goat's breakfast. That's how things were said, with humor, with shrugs. And somehow, it worked. The world wasn't sanitized, it was lived in. And that includes where they went. At the end of the day, people sat by the hearth, their pots emptied, their cloths drying. And maybe, just maybe, they told stories of the old days, of times when toilets were made of gold, or when kings had invisible stools, or when God himself wiped with clouds. Stories, you see, softened things. Even this, especially this. And so, they slept. We've wandered past castles and chamber pots, across silent fields and under moonlit windows. Tonight, we're going somewhere different. A place most people didn't want to go, but they had to. The medieval hospital. Now, don't imagine today's hospital. No machines, no white coats, no beeping, just stone, stale air, and prayers. Because if you needed care in the 1300s, that meant you'd have to live, and yes, go to the bathroom, under someone else's roof. Let's begin by stepping into a ward. The door creaks. Inside, 20 straw beds. Each has a rough linen sheet. Some have bowls beside them. Some have nothing. The patients. Some groan. Some whisper. Some just stare. They've been here for days. Or weeks. Or longer. And if they need to go, well, they use what they have. A chamber pot. A wooden bucket. Or sometimes, nothing. Monks ran most of these places. They cleaned what they could, but they were only human. Imagine Brother Alric, wiping a patient's brow, then cleaning the pot with the same hands. There were rules, but not always soap. The floor was packed earth or worn tile, sometimes covered in hay. Not to keep it warm, but to soak up what spilled, because it did, often. Now, if you were too sick to move, and many were, you soiled the sheets, and the monks would change them. Eventually, sometimes they reused the sheets, rinsed them in cold river water, hung them behind the garden, and waited for the wind to dry what the sun couldn't reach. The smell? Always there, like sour bread, like moldy apples, like rot. But not always bad. There were flowers, grown in the windowsills, lavender, marjoram, chamomile. The monks placed them under pillows, to calm the mind, to hide the truth. That in the corner, another bucket was full, and it needed emptying. Let's talk about the latrine wardens. Strange title, but real. These were the ones, not always monks, who carried the waste away, sometimes twice a day, sometimes not at all. They wore old tunics, covered their mouths with cloth, and walked fast. No one thanked them. No one looked them in the eye. But without them, the hospital would drown. Not in sickness, in filth. There's a story of a woman, her name lost to time, who became a warden after her husband died. She had no skills, no family, only strong arms. So she worked. 10 pots each morning, 10 more at night. She tied rosemary branches to her belt, to smell something else, anything else. And she saved every coin. Until one winter, she bought a new pair of boots, made of soft leather, sealed with wax, waterproof, waste-proof. She called them her walking shoes, and wore them like armor. Now, let's peek into the hospital garden. Not just for herbs, not just for food, but a place for relief. Yes, in some hospitals, if you could walk, you went outside, to a walled garden, behind the chapel. There were benches, with holes, simple, cleaned by rain, visited by birds, sometimes forgotten by time. Imagine sitting there, late at night, under stars, a single candle in your hand. The wind, cool and honest. And for a moment, you feel peace, even in sickness, even in pain, even in that most private of needs. But not all patients could walk, and some didn't make it. So what then? The dead left things behind. Not just blankets, not just names, but waste, and sometimes worse. And someone had to clean it. The youngest monks did. The new ones. They were told, if you can clean a dying man, you can clean your soul. So they did. With rags, with ash, with prayer. They sang as they worked, to silence the smell, to remind themselves this too was holy. Some hospitals had privy towers, tall stone structures, a row of wooden seats, one above the other. The top was for the strongest, the bottom for the weakest. Everything fell downward. Gravity handled what no one else wanted to. You won't believe this, but some of these towers still stand, empty, abandoned. But their walls remember the sounds, the stains, the sighs. And yet, in all this filth, there was dignity. People cared, not always in grand ways, but in small ones. A folded cloth, a fresh bowl of water, a kind word. You've done enough today. Rest. Words like that. They meant more than soap. Let's not forget the midwives. Yes, they too handled the body. And birth. A birth was messy. Blood, sweat, relief, and yes, waste. But they cleaned with reverence. Because life had arrived. And everything that came with it was sacred. Even the mess. Especially the mess. You see, in medieval times, going to the bathroom wasn't just about relief. It was about survival. It was about connection. It was about care. From the kings with golden pots, to the peasants with cold buckets, to the monks who whispered prayers into stench-filled air. They all lived through it, worked through it, slept beside it. And maybe, so can we. Not in the same way, but with the same peace. Now, we've walked through castles, toured peasant homes, snuck behind monastery walls, and even peeked inside the quiet hospitals of medieval Europe. But there's a place we've not yet gone. A place that tells us even more about how people lived, and how they let go. Tonight, we're visiting a medieval inn. Not the kind with fresh sheets and continental breakfasts, but the kind with muddy boots at the door, a dog sleeping in the ashes, and yes, a privy out back. So let's step into the inn. The floor's uneven, the walls wooden and blackened with smoke, but there's warmth here. Laughter, stew bubbling on the hearth. A bard in the corner plucks a lute string, softly, and you find a stool, just near the fire. Now imagine you've traveled far. Your legs ache, your stomach growls, and you feel the need to go. But where? Not in the corner, surely. Not in the kitchen. Not under the table like some barn dog. So, you step outside, out the back door, past the stacked firewood, beyond the pigs snorting in the dark. There, half hidden by a leaning fence, is the outhouse, a wooden shack. Single door, no light. Just a crescent moon carved into the top plank. You push the door, creak. Inside it's dark, damp. A single hole cut into a long plank. There's straw nearby, not for warmth, but for wiping. Yes, we'll get to that in a moment. The smell is earthy, not terrible, not pleasant, just real. You sit, quietly, and in the stillness, you hear things. A cricket chirping, rain hitting the roof, someone laughing far inside the inn. It's a moment, strangely peaceful, a little absurd, but part of life. And here, in this tiny shack of wood and nails, you understand something. This is how people lived, how they carried on. No flush, no faucet, just a hole, a breeze and the sky. Now let's talk about what came next. You finished. But what about cleaning up? Toilet paper? No, not yet, not even close. Instead you had straw, or moss, or old cloth if you were lucky. Imagine the texture. Dry, scratchy, not comfortable. But it worked. Sometimes people used wooden sticks, called gomp sticks in some places. Smooth, polished by hand, dipped in water before use. In Japan they had a version too, called chuji. Different lands, same needs. If you were rich, you might have a cloth square, reusable, washed by the help, boiled, dried on a line behind the manor. Not glamorous, just necessary. And after you wiped, well, you stood, fastened your belt, maybe muttered a prayer, and left. No soap, maybe a rinse in the rain barrel, but more often, just dirt. Dirt on hands, on boots, on everything. Let's go back inside the inn now. The light is warm, the ale slightly sour, the people loud and alive. But remember, all of them, everyone, has visited that outhouse. Or worse, they didn't. Ah yes, because not everyone bothered to walk out back. Some, they used a chamber pot. Right there, under the table, beside the bed. Especially in winter. Especially when drunk. Let's paint the picture. A man wakes in the middle of the night. He doesn't want to go outside. It's snowing. The wind howls. So he reaches beneath the bed, finds the cold metal handle, pulls out the pot, and relieves himself. All while wrapped in furs. Half dreaming, half freezing. He sets the pot beside the hearth to keep it from freezing. He'll dump it tomorrow. Or the maid will, maybe. And what if there's no pot? Then, there's the street. Yes, people sometimes leaned out windows, tipped a bowl, and shouted, "Gardez-vous." It meant, look out, in Old French. Imagine walking down the alley, and someone pours a bucket of, well, waste, right next to you. You jump, curse, wipe your boot on the nearest post, and keep walking, because that was just life. Let's zoom in now. Let's look at a town, like York, or Bruges, or a village tucked along a quiet stream. There, you'd find communal privies, built along the edge of the water, wooden huts, shared by several families. The waste dropped below, into the stream. Yes, the same stream they drank from, and bathed in, and fished from. You won't believe this, but many people thought that if water was flowing, it was clean, even if waste floated by. Now, not everyone accepted this. Some towns had rules. Do not empty waste after dark. Do not pour slops into the market square. But did people listen? Sometimes, and sometimes, they didn't. They were tired, cold, busy, or simply used to it. And so, the smells mingled with the bread stalls, and the hay, and the horses, and the dogs. But still, people laughed, danced, fell in love, even with all the stink. Because life doesn't wait for perfume. There's a story of a shoemaker's apprentice in Ghent. He built his own privy behind the shop, used leftover leather scraps to make the seat softer, and charged neighbors a penny to use it. They lined up. He made enough to buy a second hammer, and a hat. They called it the penny privy. Small things, big memories. Let's walk through that town at night now. The stars shine dimly above. The tavern door creaks closed. Someone stumbles into the alley, leans on a barrel, and sighs. Somewhere water trickles. And in the silence, you hear it again. Gardez-vous. A moment later, a splash. Best to stay close to the walls tonight. And still, people survived. They found ways, rituals, habits. They washed in basins, cleaned hands with vinegar, rubbed sage leaves between fingers. Not perfect, but honest, and deeply human, just like us. So now, as the fire inside the inn grows dim, As boots are pulled off, one by one, and the beds are filled with snoring guests, you close your eyes too, and smile, because now, you know how even the smallest, messiest part of life was shared by all, rich or poor, young or old, drunk or divine, and there's something strangely comforting in that, isn't there? Let's breathe together for a second. Ah, there we go. So now, we've wandered through muddy streets, peeked into outhouses behind inns, shared a quiet moment with moss, buckets, and wooden seats. But tonight, we head somewhere new. Somewhere sacred. Somewhere quiet. We're stepping into a monastery. Yes, a place of stillness, of whispered prayers, of chanting in cold stone halls, and, believe it or not, a place where people went to the bathroom too. Ah, the monastery. Gray walls, tall arches, candles flickering softly. The monks here, they wear brown robes tied with rope. They don't speak much. They move like slow shadows. Now imagine waking up at 3 in the morning. It's winter. You're a monk. The bell rings. Time to pray. But first, your stomach turns. Something doesn't feel right. So you slip from your straw mattress, step into your sandals, and walk down the stone corridor, all the way to the reredort. Ah, now that's a word, isn't it? Reredorter. It means the latrine of the monastery. And this, oh Finn, this was no ordinary outhouse. Some monasteries, especially in England and France, had advanced latrines for the time, rows of holes, stone seats, a channel of water flowing beneath, carrying everything away. Clever, right? Some even had toilet towers, tall structures over rivers, built just for that purpose. You climbed up, did your business, and the river below took care of the rest. Simple, but kind of genius. Now, back in the hallway, you hold a candle, its wax drips onto your fingers. You walk barefoot through the chill. Each step echoes. Down the hall, past the library, over to the reredorter. You enter quietly. And inside, you hear the soft sound of water trickling beneath the floor. A faint drip, drip, like a lullaby made of stone. The reredorter might have had wooden seats, sometimes cushioned with straw, and it might have been attached directly to the dormitory. Yes, imagine waking up and not needing to go outside at all. You just climbed to the back of the room and used the seat, and in that still ancient quiet, you were left alone with your thoughts. The cold, the water, and the darkness. Some monks wrote that the silence in the latrine was a holy thing, a place for reflection, meditation, even confession, because when else were you so alone? Now let's talk about cleaning. Monks were expected to be clean, spiritually, and sometimes physically. So many monasteries had washhouses nearby. Basins of water, sometimes with vinegar added. You dipped your hands, rubbed them together, shook them dry. No soap. Not usually. But herbs like rosemary or mint were sometimes rubbed on the palms. You can almost smell it, can't you? And what about wiping? Ah, yes. Even monks had to wipe. In most monasteries, they used cloths. Reusable. Boiled regularly. Sometimes shared. Sometimes not. More prestigious abbeys had supplies of moss. Carefully gathered. Cleaned. Dried. Soft. Gentle. Almost luxurious. In some documents, it's written that the monk on latrine duty had to replace the wiping moss every few days. A full-time job. Can you imagine? I am Brother William, keeper of the moss. And here's something stranger. Some monasteries had latrine libraries. Yes, books. Not for wiping. No. But for reading. The monks believed that even while relieving the body, one could feed the mind. So a few psalms, maybe a page from St. Augustine, tucked near the seat. And so, between drips and dribbles, they read, and thought, and maybe prayed a little too. Let's walk through the courtyard now. The grass is wet, rain has fallen, the air smells like earth and stone. A young monk, maybe 17, he carries a bucket. He's heading to the compost pile. That's where some of the night waste goes. It's turned with straw, let to rot, and eventually used to fertilize the herb garden. Yes, the same garden that grows mint, thyme, lavender. There's something circular in that, isn't there? Waste turned into healing. Life into life. There are stories of monks who grew so good at composting, Other towns sent their own chamber pots to them. They paid in bread, wool, sometimes wine, all for the promise of healthy soil. And you'd think that monks living so simply wouldn't care about privacy. But that's not quite true. In many monasteries, the rear door had partitions, little wooden barriers between seats, just enough to shield a shoulder, maybe a glance. Because even in silence, modesty mattered. No doors, but dignity. Now let's follow an older monk. He's been here 30 years. He walks slowly, his robe is patched, his hands rough. He knows every creak of the wooden floor, every chip in the stone. He enters the rear door at dawn. And just before sitting, he lights a little stick of rosemary, sets it in the corner. Why? To scent the air. Even in a place meant for letting go, there's room for beauty, for ritual. You see, Finn, in the medieval mind, the body and the soul were not so separate. To clean the hands was to clean the heart. To relieve the body was to honor the gift of life. So even in the cold, damp corners of a monastery bathroom, there was care, order, and, strangely enough, peace. And that brings us to something unexpected. The latrine songs. Yes, some monks, when cleaning the Ritterdorter, would hum a chant, a tune, sometimes nonsense sounds. It kept the rhythm, made the work feel lighter, and maybe masked the smell a little. Can you hear it? Low, soft, like wind through reeds. So now, let's leave the monastery. The sky outside is just turning pale, the world waking again. And the monks, they're off to prayer, having already done what they needed to do. You step outside, feel the cool air, and smile. Because in all this silence, all this stillness, you've discovered another piece of the puzzle. The bathroom was never just a place. It was a ritual, a rhythm, a breath, just like now. And as we rest, here in the quiet space between dreams and sleep, maybe, just maybe, you'll remember a bit of moss, a soft chant, and the gentle drip of clean water beneath a stone floor. And this time, we find ourselves in a place few would expect. But it's very real and very quiet. Tonight, we walk slowly toward the castle. Yes, massive stone walls, echoes of armor, a wind that whistles through arrow slits, and hidden somewhere inside is the castle's bathroom. You might be thinking, what does royalty do when nature calls? Where does a knight in shining armor go when he really has to go? Well, you're about to find out. Let's begin. Imagine you're standing at the foot of a tall stone tower, the kind you've seen in old paintings, flags flying from the top, a drawbridge groaning closed behind you. Inside the castle, it's quiet. You hear footsteps on old wood, the clink of chainmail, the soft rustle of tapestries. Now, let's head up. We walk up the winding stairs, slowly, stone after stone, one spiral at a time, and just as you catch your breath, you notice a small, narrow door tucked into the stone wall. It's barely noticeable. No decoration, just wood. A latch. You open it, and there it is. The garderobe. That's what it was called. Garderobe. A fancy word for a very simple room. A room with a hole built into the wall. The castle's bathroom. Now, let's step inside. Careful, the space is tight. Just enough room to sit. Sometimes a little bench. Sometimes stone. There's a hole leading down to the outside. And here's the thing. That hole didn't lead to plumbing. It didn't go to a sewer. Nope. It dropped everything straight down the side of the castle, into what they called the moat. Or more often, a big stinking pit. Sometimes the waste hit a pile of straw below. Sometimes it splashed into water. And sometimes, well, it just sort of stayed there. But there's something oddly clever about it. The garderobe was always placed on the outer wall of the castle. Why? Because it kept the smell far from the living areas. And also, if invaders tried to climb the walls, let's just say, they might get a surprise. Yes. Some historians believe the garderobe chute acted as a kind of natural defense. Imagine trying to climb up the outside wall, only to get hit with, let's just say, medieval leftovers. Now let's look closer. Some garderobes were more than a simple hole. In richer castles, they had stone chutes, angled downward, smoothly carved, with a bit of a curve, like a water slide. Well, not exactly like that, but you get the idea. And here's something even more curious. People used the same small room to hang their clothes. Yes, that's where the word garderobe comes from. Garter means to guard. Robe means, well, robes. It was believed that the strong smell of human waste would kill fleas in the clothing. Fleas were a real problem back then. So, knights and lords would hang their cloaks in the garderobe. A bit strange, but in their minds practical. Let's sit for a moment. Feel the cold stone beneath you. The air is damp. You can hear the wind outside. The quiet creak of a door somewhere below. The hole in the floor. It smells, of course, but it's familiar, normal. For a medieval noble, this was just part of the day. Now imagine, you're a servant, climbing the tower each day, to clean the waste pit beneath the garderobe. You shovel it into barrels. You haul it away. Maybe to the fields. Maybe just somewhere far from the castle. The smell stays on you. The other servants avoid you. But you're paid, a little. You are the garderobe boy. And no one thanks you. But they all need you. Let's step out for a second. Feel the difference in the air. Back in the hallway, it smells of stone and dust. Almost clean. People walk past. Knights, maids, squires. None of them look toward the garderobe. It's not polite to mention it, even though everyone uses it. That's just how it was. Now, in some castles, the garderobe had a wooden seat, a lid, even a hook for a lantern. But many didn't. You just sat. Sometimes, in the dead of winter, the stone was ice cold. And what did they use to wipe? Good question. In castles they might use cloth rags, or moss, brought in from the woods. Sometimes wool scraps, or even hay. And when the rags were too soiled, they were burned, or thrown into a fire pit below. Here's something few people know. In some castles, they had double garderobes. 2 holes, side by side, one for you, and one for a guest. Imagine that. You and a visiting lord, sitting side by side, both doing your business, in total silence. Or maybe, a whispered conversation about taxes. There's even one recorded case, of a king being assassinated while on the garderobe. Can you imagine? Vulnerable, alone, and someone burst in, sword drawn, right at that moment. Now, what if you were sick, or injured, couldn't climb the tower? Then servants brought you a chamber pot, a simple clay or pewter bowl, used at the bedside, then carried away quickly. Sometimes the pot was dumped outside, sometimes into a pit, and just tossed into the street. Yes, even from castle windows. The truth is, even the finest castle had to deal with waste. Even kings had to go, and they did it just like everyone else. On a cold stone seat, over a long drop, in a tiny room with no privacy. Funny, isn't it? How something so basic, so human, connects us all. You see, Finn, even in a world of swords and scrolls, of banquets and battles, there was always this little room, hidden behind a wooden door. Always waiting, always necessary, always humble. So as you lie there now, eyes heavy, breathing slow, just remember, the castles of history were full of quiet places, soft moss, wind through stone, the hush of footsteps on a spiral stair, and somewhere in all that, a quiet room, for a quiet need, doing what must be done. And now that we've left the castle, our journey continues, without rush, without noise, just us, drifting softly, and tonight, we're stepping outside again. But this time, not to the woods, and not to the castle walls. No, tonight we're going to the town, to the heart of the medieval city, where the streets are narrow, the rooftops are close, and every window whispers stories. Memphis. Let's go. Imagine you are walking through a medieval town just after dusk. It's quiet. The sun has dipped behind the rooftops, and the smell of wood smoke lingers softly in the cool air. You hear distant laughter, a baby crying somewhere behind a wooden shutter. And then, splash. Yes, something just hit the cobblestone beside you. Was it water? Not quite. You look up, and there's a woman holding a clay pot at her window. She yells, "Garde l'eau," a warning. It means, watch out for the water. But it's not water, it's the contents of a chamber pot, thrown right into the street below. Yep, that was normal. In medieval towns, most people didn't have indoor toilets. They used chamber pots at night. And in the morning, or sometimes whenever they felt like it, they tossed it out the window. But at least, they often yelled first. Garde l'eau, in France. Look out below, in England. And sometimes, Nothing at all. Imagine walking through the street, holding your cloak up, dodging puddles that weren't made by rain. Now, the streets weren't like ours today. They were often uneven, made of stone or dirt, and usually sloped slightly toward the center. Why? Because of the gutter. Ah yes, the open gutter. Every street had one, right down the middle. A small ditch where water, waste, and well, everything else would run. In theory, it was a way to clean the streets. In practice, it was a long, stinky, sluggish little river, carrying chamber pot contents, animal droppings, food scraps, old clothes, and worse. People tried to avoid walking in the center, but sometimes, you had no choice. And if it rained, oh dear, the gutters overflowed, and the whole street became a soup. Imagine the smell. And remember, these towns were crowded. Dozens of homes, packed tightly. Markets full of animals. Bakers, butchers, fish sellers, all adding to the stew. Now, let's step into a house. A small one. Timber walls. A thatched roof. Inside, a family of 5. They live, sleep, and eat in one room. There's no bathroom, no sink, no running water. At night, they use a wooden bucket, or a clay bowl, or just step outside into the alley behind the house. No privacy, no shame, just part of life. Children were taught early where to go, when to go, and how not to get it on their shoes. And when morning came, someone had to empty the pot, usually a young one. They learned fast. But there was another solution too. Public latrines. Yes, medieval cities began to build public toilets. They weren't like ours. No doors, no flush. Just wooden benches with holes, built over pits or streams. Some were run by churches, others by local guilds, and a few were even fancy, with stone walls and roofs. One in London was built on a bridge. Yes, a toilet over the Thames River. All the waste dropped into the water below. Kind of clever, and very messy. Let's go visit one. It's late evening. A torch flickers beside the door. Inside, it's dim and smells of use. You step in. It's quiet. There are a few people inside, sitting silently, each on their own wooden seat. Just holes side by side. No partitions, no privacy, but no one seems to mind. It's just what people did. There might be a small stack of hay beside the bench, or some rags. That's what people used to clean up. Sometimes, you brought your own cloth, reusable, or, if you were poor, just a leaf from outside. Some cities had workers, whose job it was to empty the latrines. They were called gong farmers. Gong, from the old word for dung. They worked at night. They carried long shovels and wore thick leather boots, and they dug the waste out of the pits and took it far away, usually to the fields, sometimes to the rivers. And the smell, it stayed with them for days. But they were paid well. No one wanted to do it, but someone had to. Now let's step outside again. The streets are quiet. The stars are just beginning to show. There's a bucket beside someone's door. An old woman lifts it and walks carefully down to the gutter. She empties it, gently, then rinses it with a little water, and goes back inside. No drama, no disgust, just routine. People learned to live with it, with the smells, with the mess, with the way the city breathed and groaned and leaked. It was alive. In its own strange way. Here's something curious. City officials tried to clean things up. They passed laws. No dumping chamber pots after sunrise. No waste in the streets near the church. Fines for dumping too close to the market. But, enforcing it, that was harder. Because in the end, everyone had to go. And not everyone had a bucket, or a place to dump it quietly. Now, imagine lying in bed at night. The shutters are closed. The fire is low. You hear a soft rustling outside. Footsteps, a soft splash, and then quiet again. That was the rhythm of medieval towns. Go quietly, live closely, and clean only when you must. But there's something comforting in all that. No pretenses, no perfumes, just people, living, as best they could, with what they had. And when morning came, the sun would rise over rooftops, chickens would scurry through the alleys, and someone would yell, "Look out below." So as you settle into the softness of your blanket, and your breath slows, let this image stay with you. A quiet town, stone streets, wooden windows, and the gentle rhythm of life, and nature, and necessity. Even now, as your eyelids grow heavier, the medieval town sleeps too. And tonight, we're leaving the town behind. The city gates are slowly closing, the guards yawn, and you take a deep breath as you step outside. Tonight, we're going into the countryside. Ah, the countryside. Wide open fields, distant hills rolling like soft blankets, the stars stretching over everything like a gentle dome. And somewhere, down a quiet path lined with moss and stone, there's a medieval farmhouse. A small one, thatch on the roof, cows nearby, dozing softly, a fire glowing inside. Let's go in. The family who lives here, they don't have a toilet, no chamber pot even. Instead, they have a small wooden seat in the corner of the barn, a hole in the ground beneath it, covered most of the time with a plank. And during the day, when someone needed to go, they walked. Yep, just walked out into the fields, behind a tree, beside a stone wall, or near the stream, if they were careful. Nature was their bathroom. Now don't get uncomfortable. For them, it wasn't strange. It wasn't embarrassing. It was quiet, simple, free. You'd squat carefully, maybe with a stick to brush away leaves. Then clean yourself with hay, leaves, or if it was winter, a snowball. Yes, a snowball. Cold, but very clean. If you were working in the field all day, far from home, you didn't stop to run back. You just found a spot. Every cow, every chicken, every pig, they did it right there too. So it felt natural. And guess what? Sometimes that waste became something useful. Let's talk about night soil. People realized that waste, especially human waste, could help crops grow, so they saved it. Yep, they built middens, little heaps where waste and straw were piled. Over time, it turned into dark, rich soil. Farmers would take buckets of this soil and spread it over their fields. It smelled, yes, but it made the wheat tall, the cabbage round, and the onions strong. And so, waste was part of life's circle. Now picture this. It's early morning. The rooster crows. The family wakes slowly, stretching, scratching, yawning. Someone gets up, pulls on their tunic, and walks barefoot outside. The grass is wet with dew. You see them disappear behind a bush, just for a minute, then return, wiping their hands on a cloth. No words, just routine, a rhythm, like eating, like breathing. Back inside the farmhouse, there's a bucket of water by the hearth. It's for washing up. But no one uses soap every day. Maybe just their hands. Maybe not even that. Because in the countryside, clean didn't mean spotless. It meant not covered in actual dirt. That's all. Now let's visit someone else. A shepherd, sleeping under the stars. He's been out with his flock for days. No roof, no walls, just the open sky, and the warmth of the sheep. When he needs to go, he walks a few steps away, carefully, avoiding thorns, and he squats, quickly, then covers it with a rock. Simple, efficient, and no one around to care. You see, the countryside was wide, and the air was clean. There were no chamber pots here, no shared toilets, just open spaces and gentle breezes. It was quieter, calmer, and somehow, more honest. But there were rules too. Families with wells didn't go near them. Waste near water was dangerous. They'd teach children, not here, go farther, not too close to the cowshed. Everyone knew, not from books, but from stories, passed down like songs. And for women, it was harder, because they wore long dresses, and privacy was rare. But they learned young, to lift their skirts, to hold them carefully, to squat just enough, and to watch out for bugs. They had tricks, using stones to stay dry. They moved in groups, they whispered, and they laughed quietly. In the forest, there were places too. Old logs, hidden dips, little nooks behind brambles. Some called them quiet corners. Some had names. Families would say, go to the shadow rock, or use the fox path. Soft little codes. Only they understood. Now back inside the farmhouse. Night has come. The stars peek through a hole in the thatch. The fire is just embers, and someone stirs under their wool blanket. They need to go. But it's dark, and cold, so they hold it. Yes. Sometimes, they just waited. Because the outhouse was too far, the field too wet, the path too steep. So they turned over, wrapped their legs tighter, and went back to sleep. That's the thing. Going to the bathroom was not about comfort, or style, or speed. It was about patience, and rhythm. Knowing the land, feeling the breeze, hearing the owls and the rustling grass. There were no lights, no toilet paper, no sink, only the earth, the trees, the moss and the stones, and a small wooden seat in the barn, waiting quietly in the shadows. So as you lie here, feeling the softness of your blanket, and listening to the silence around you. Imagine you are there, in the countryside, far from noise, far from rush, just you, and the gentle breath of the hills. A quiet place to let go. A calm place to rest. But in a place even quieter, more distant, more forgotten. A monastery. Just imagine that. Tall stone walls, ivy creeping slowly up the sides, and a silence that is not empty, but full of prayers, of whispers, of time moving gently. You see, the monks here live a very different life. No gold, no crowds, no laughter even. Only work, only prayer, and simplicity. But yes, even monks had to go to the bathroom. The place they used was called the reverdorter. Strange word, right? Reverdorter. It means the latrine building, the communal toilet placed usually behind the dormitory. So if someone needed to go during the night, they didn't have to walk far. It was long. Stone, sometimes wooden benches, with round holes, and underneath a channel of running water. Ah, yes. Monks had their own little sewage system. Clean, simple, no fancy decorations. And no privacy either. You see, privacy wasn't important to them. Humility was. Silence was. Stillness was. So they sat beside each other, quietly. Not a word, not a glance. And when they were done, they washed their hands from a shared basin. Cold water, no soap. And they left. Some of them didn't even look up. Because for them, the body was just a shell, a vessel. And the bathroom was just one more way to remain humble. Now let's go deeper. In some monasteries, monks were not allowed to speak at all, not even to ask, "Can I go?" Instead, they used hand signs. A special motion meant, "I need to leave." Another meant, "I'm going to wash." Simple, clear, and no one questioned it. Because everyone needed to go sometimes. But here's something, quite surprising. Some of the cleanest toilets in medieval times were found in monasteries. Why? Because monks had time. They had order. They believed in care of the body, the soul, and the buildings. So the reverdorter wasn't a stinking hole. It was swept, cleansed, even designed to let in light and air. Imagine that. A place to relieve yourself that felt almost sacred. And when monks built monasteries near rivers, they would channel a little stream directly under the reverdorter, so that the waste was carried away, naturally. No smell, no mess. Clever, isn't it? Quiet genius. Now, let's walk outside, down the stone hallway, past the herb garden, where lavender and sage grow in neat rows, and look at something even more curious, the necessarium. It's like a private chamber for special monks, old ones, sick ones, or high-ranking abbots. They had their own little room, a small wooden seat, a window with no glass, just a shutter, and beside it, a shelf, with a sponge, or rags, or moss, cleaned with vinegar, or soaked in herbs. Because cleanliness was a part of worship too, and in some places, they even burned rosemary near the latrines, not just for the smell, but for the spirit. Even waste had its place in holiness. And yes, sometimes, mistakes happened. Rain would flood the reverdorter. Animals would get inside. Children in training would make a mess. But the monks, they never got angry. They just cleaned and kept going. Because their life was not about comfort or control. It was about flow, like the water beneath the stones, always moving, always leaving, always quiet. One monk even wrote, "To relieve the body is no shame, as to feed it is no glory. In silence we pass, as water through stone." Beautiful. Peaceful. Now think of this. A young boy has just joined the monastery. He's nervous. He doesn't know the signs yet. One night, he wakes, stomach aching, and he walks barefoot across cold stone floors. His candle flickers. He opens the wooden door, and there, in the quiet, he sits. A moment passes, then another, and he realizes, it's okay. Everyone here does this, and no one is watching. Just the wind through the high windows. Just the rustling of dry leaves outside. And his breath, soft, like a prayer. You see, in monasteries, the bathroom wasn't separate from life. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't feared. It was accepted, welcomed, like hunger, like sleep, like stillness. And so here, in this gentle corner of the world, we find one of the most peaceful places to simply go. No rush, No shame. No loud noises. Only quiet stone. Flowing water. And monks who understood that even the smallest moments mattered. It isn't about one building, or one habit. It's about something deeper. Something that connects it all. What really was it, to go to the bathroom in medieval times? Not just the where, or the how, but the experience, the feelings, the way it shaped daily life, and even dignity. Tina Live. Let's take one last slow walk, back through what we've learned. In the castle halls, we saw royalty with stone seats and velvet curtains, but no privacy. Even the king, with all his wealth, had to sit and wait, just like anyone else. There was a man, dressed in soft robes, called the groom of the stool, whose whole job was to help the king relieve himself. Can you imagine a person trusted more than generals because he was there at the king's most vulnerable moment? That's how much bathroom life meant. Then we wandered into the village. The peasants and the farmers, no stone seats here, just wooden planks, or dirt or holes covered by hay. And yet, even in that simplicity, people found rhythm. Morning visits, nightly habits. Children taught not with shame, but with quiet repetition. We saw the outhouses, the chamber pots under beds, the moss gathered from trees, the worn cloth rinsed in icy wells. It was messy, uncertain, sometimes even dangerous. But still, life moved on. In cities, things were louder. Smells floating through streets. Barrels dumped into rivers. Chamber pots emptied out of windows with a shout. Garde low. Watch out for the water, they would say. But it wasn't water. It was everything else. Chaotic, isn't it? Yet, people adapted. They walked carefully, built shoes with thick soles. They kept lemons by their windows, or held herbs to their noses. Small ways to fight the big stink. Then, we found the monasteries. Where even a toilet could feel like part of a prayer. Where silence reigned, even in the latrines. Where dignity wasn't hidden behind a door, but carried in every quiet step. The monks knew something many others forgot. That even nature was sacred. Even the body deserved care. And now, let's look at the little details. What if you were sick? In medieval times that made things harder. Diarrhea from bad meat. Constipation from dry bread. No soft toilet paper. Just whatever was near. Sometimes, it was a cold cloth soaked in vinegar. Other times, it was straw or wool scraps. And if you were very poor, there were no rags, no privacy. You would just go behind a bush, or in the woods, or near the edges of town, and hope the rain would wash it away. Sad, isn't it? But also, real. Because bathroom life in the Middle Ages wasn't just about where people went. It was about what they could afford, who they were, and how they lived. Let's remember this too. Women. A topic often skipped in old stories. How did women manage? Slowly, carefully. They had long dresses, layers and layers of cloth. Some used special cloths tucked under their skirts. Others squatted in fields, behind walls, in corners of kitchens. Pregnant women, old women. They had no support, no handles, no comfort. But they were strong. They adapted, and they taught their daughters how to be strong too. And then, there were travelers, merchants, pilgrims, beggars. They used rivers, forests, roadside fields. Many carried little pouches, filled with dry herbs, to mask the smell, to cleanse their hands, to carry dignity, on the road. Even knights, wore armor, layers of metal. How did they go? They didn't always wait. In battle, on horses, in the cold. Sometimes, they just let go, and hoped to clean it later. Not very heroic, but very human. You see, behind the battles, the poems, the legends, everyone had a body. Everyone had to go. It's the one thing that united kings and peasants, monks and merchants, knights and nuns. The need for relief, the need for care, the quiet moments, when all power fell away, and all that remained, was breath, and waiting, and release. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How we think of the past as so distant, so strange, so dirty. But, they were just people. People like us. Just with fewer tools. And a little more patience. And through all of this, they survived. They laughed. They sang. They whispered to each other across stone walls. Even as they sat, on cold wooden seats. In quiet corners. with the scent of lavender drifting in from the garden. Sometimes, life is not about grand things. Sometimes, it's about what you do when you really need to go. And so, that brings us to the end. The end of a story, not told in swords or scrolls, but in silence, and moss, and moonlight. If you are still awake, then I think you might want to see the video from the 17th minute of the story. Or, play this side video. Maybe it can help you sleep better. Goodbye.